Hey guys, Sean, Leslie for Dummies. Today I just wanted to have a chat about Autofire and why it happens or why it doesn't happen, which still not 100% sure on that, but there's nothing that I'm able to actually test myself with the equipment that I have to the reasons that I'll speak of. So I'm gonna fire my test mule today with a factory M17 spring. Previously, with this regulator, as I spoke about many times before, this is a problematic regulator for me because I drilled completely through it and the rush of air is just too much for the factory bolt spring. But I've actually shimmed the factory bolt spring. Something that I actually did want to try some time ago, and I never got to it, mainly because I thought shimming the spring isn't really, in my opinion, isn't a great idea, because I was thinking that recoil, that percussion that spring is under, it was just going to eat up whatever shim I put in there, and that might be the case. I don't know. This is the first time I'm shimming the M17 spring, so I chose the shortest, most worn out M17 spring that I had, that I know caused auto fire. And we're gonna see how the shim does today. And again, I'm gonna be basing it on my last two videos where I ran two different types of spring combinations, and between one spring and the other, they were between, I think, 5 to 7 FPS difference. But I want to see, did the factory do us dirty with, well, at least for LL, with the bolt spring. So I'll throw this down on the table and we'll have a look. I got a bit of mishmash of parts here because I don't have actually a spare air chamber to demonstrate the specific part to the M17. So I brought out a VKS bolt and air chamber that I had because they work on the same principle. So these are two factory M17 springs. It's gonna be tough to detect, but I can tell you that little bit difference there, this was out of my newer M17 that didn't auto fire. But of course that was on a unmodified regulator. Well, an undrilled regulator, we'll say. So this other spring has lost a little bit of static length, and what I was talking about, I don't really have a way of testing, is what a brand new bolt spring, what the compression, I guess they measure it in inch pounds or foot pounds. I don't know what a brand new one out of the box does compared to, say, one that I know is giving me auto fire problems. That's the conundrum I have with this is I don't know. So what I'm gonna do is run the shim in here and see, do I lose valuable velocity, or is it that detrimental to the marker's operation? Here is why auto fire happens. Weak spring is the #1 culprit, but it is on a modified marker. In paintball form, the M17 is perfectly capable of maintaining paintball velocity, and that's all this spring was ever designed to do. So imagine your bolt, it's resting right about here. When you air it up, it launches forward and clicks into the sear here and is in its ready state of fire. When you fire, it releases the air charge, your bolt moves forward, but it's released the air charge in this pin that's inside here, which is your firing pin. You can see the screw down there. And I'll demonstrate this on the VKS bolt in a minute. The air pressure, when you release that sear, starts moving the bolt forward, but doesn't release the charge of air down the barrel until it breaks the plane of that screw firing pin. So locks forward, ready fire, you pull the trigger. It starts moving forward, and probably right about here, that pin that's inside here breaks the plane of the air chamber, kind of simultaneously as this bolt pushes your round forward. And at this point is when it releases the air, and down your barrel it goes. And it attempts to reset. In a modified regulator, this air is rushing so fast trying to fill that chamber because there's no obstructions like in a intact regulator, that the spring is doing the reset here, guys. So that spring pressure is what's pushing your bolt back to the ready state. Now, spring pressure is not great enough to overcome the air that's rushing in to charge, because until this pin closes back down onto the air chamber, there's air still moving through the bolt and down your barrel. Now, all this stuff happens in split seconds, but it's enough to cause problems. So bolt's trying to reset, spring's not strong enough, air's rushing in. It doesn't make it to the locked sear position. It makes it, just guessing, maybe halfway. And I say halfway because if you notice, when you get Autofire, it is not actually discharging rounds. That means your bolt isn't actually fully retracting, because if it was, it would be locking on the sear. Autofire is stopping, you know, probably halfway, and it's just going, and then it goes into this constant state, which is what we're calling Autofire. It's not actually loading a ball. It's just stuck in limbo before your sear. And here, I'll show it on here. So pretending this is your M17 heat core, and this is the M17 bolt. We all know the mil-sig O-ring. Obviously, this is not a mil-sig O-ring because it's just a factory VKS bolt. Right there is when the pin hits that O-ring. So even in a VKS or an FSC, when you charge a marker, it budges forward just a hair, and you hear that snap, the click. When you release the sear, the bolt starts moving forward because the air is trying to get out, and then right there, is when that pin breaks the plane. And now picture this air is just rushing out of there, and the bolt's trying to go back, and it just bumps that O-ring. And then it starts doing this. Same thing is happening inside the M17. That pin is not closing on that O-ring seal. If it did, the spring pressure would probably be enough to reset your bolt properly. And something that's always I've wondered myself is measure the volume of an FSC chamber and measure the volume, like the calculated air volume of an M17 chamber, to see if they are on par with each other. Because as you guys know, the M17 isn't that great on air, and I've often wondered why. I mean, there's some theories out there that it's actually losing air pressure through the heat core O-ring. I don't know. Not something I've dove too far into yet, but we're working towards it. Spring pressure does play a part in that. Hopefully that's just it's a little tidbit. I I would have loved to just open this up, but my marker is already shimmed and set up and ready to go. So I used what I had laying around. Let's see, will it auto fire with the shim and what my velocity is. I'll be trying out a new configuration of my trap. So yesterday I had each individual piece of nylon folded in half and then over each rod. So what I did today is actually just put a single of the folds in front and put the other over the back rod. So there's actually 3 layers in the back that are over the back rod, and then just a single, well, single, when I say single, it's a single folded layer over the front. 9.9 gram Canada rye balls. For safety, because I know this spring previously auto-fired, I am only loading 3 to start anyways. $280. $284. One more. $286. No auto fire, but a severe cut in velocity compared to my 350s and 360s yesterday. I was shooting on a different spring combination. So shimming the M17 spring, at least with the size shim I used, is too large. So I'm gonna go change that right now. We're back. My apologies. The shim that I used was 10 millimeters. I didn't account for the recess. You know, when you look at your bolt, I took it inside, of course. There's a little recess in your bolt where the spring actually kind of interlocks. I didn't account for that. So that's about a 3 millimeter rise, and this particular spacer was sitting on top of that and not inside the recess. So that was a 13 millimeter spacer for all intents and purposes. And it was quite obvious what it did. The sound was muted, and the reason the sound is muted because that pin wasn't fully opening. I mean, it was opening, but not fully. So that air was just kind of squeaking down the sides and then closing back up. Oh, the shim did serve a purpose in that I didn't experience auto fire. That is a significant loss in power, and that's not something I'm interested in. So I went to the other extreme, and I went to a 3 millimeter shim. So essentially all I've done is take up the recess in the bolt, and we'll see how it does. And I have another shim, the next kind of in between, which would be an 8 millimeter. So depending on what happens here, if we go into auto fire, then obviously I need a larger shim, and then it'll be really come down to the loss of velocity if it's even worthwhile. 3 rounds again, Canada rye balls, just 3 for safety, so I can keep my shins. $358. Right up there, boys and girls. So that's right on par with what I was hitting yesterday and the day before. $354. 356. And no rebounds. I actually made a change too while we were taking a break there. I moved, it's still a single sheet in front, but I used my clamps to clamp it backwards. So far so good. I didn't come here for the trap. I said no more trap stuff, but the trap's gonna be an ongoing project until it's working as best as I can get it to work. Well, the 3mm shim worked. So I'm gonna load up a full mag here and we'll see if we can get through without any hiccups. 15 in the mag. No chronos. We'll do one, just to make sure nothing changed. $352. I actually can hear a slight hissing, so I haven't changed the heat core O-ring in this marker in a very long time, so I should probably do that on the next go around, which might be sooner than you think. Pretty successful. The trap did well too. It got tugged a little, my clamps, but they all stayed in, and I did hit a couple on the outside there, so I did dislodge a clamp again as well, but better. No Autofire, but I want to know what that other shim's gonna do. So I am gonna swap it out, and I'm also going to change my heat core O-ring out because marker should be quiet, and it's like gurgling just a little bit, so I'm probably losing a little air. So let's go do that. $8mm shim installed. Can of rebels. What do we know so far? 3mm shim didn't take a cut in power. 13mm, a significant cut in power. I also found I had a slight leak from my bolt area here, and it turns out mil-sigs don't go bad in M17s that often. At least I haven't found that. I don't spit O-rings that often in my M17. What I did find is my air chamber is Loctite from the factory, and I don't re-Loctite them after I do my whole bypass thing, and I got about an 1/8 turn on it, so I'm hoping that was the issue. But for this test, it doesn't really matter. I might lose a couple FPS. $8mm is still too long. Not as bad as a 13, but not as good as a 3. So I'll probably try another one in between, but I'm gonna call it for this video. And some of you might be asking why I did this when there are options for better bolt springs out there. Well, I started my channel on the M17 based on the fact that most of the mods you could do to it were garage mods, so to speak. And for you guys out there that follow my channel and have gone through some of the steps and built a marker and then ran into issues, like myself with Autofire, having a method to correct it cheaply, locally, is always my top priority. Stuff isn't cheap for me either, guys. I mean, having to order stuff from retailers and pay shipping and yada yada yada. I mean, it gets old fast. I get it, and there are good products out there. There surely are, and some of them are very much worth paying that money for. If you're savvy enough to search these items out, you know, from whatever sources, AliExpress, your local Fastenal dealer, Ackland's, Granger. I mean, most of these screws can be had for pennies, really, except that usually pennies per screw means you gotta buy like a minimum $5 worth, and you might end up with 100 or something crazy like that. But trust me, I got a lot of screws. I'm doing it that way. But for me, that was always part of the fun, and it was about finding stuff for you guys that you could source locally, and that's kind of always what I'll go back to. I love testing new products, and there are some good ones. But in the end, I always revert back to my roots, and that was trying to make your marker better, more reliable. If you are experiencing Autofire, there's a couple of easy solutions aside from a bolt spring. And in most cases, I think you guys are running the V2 bypass. And just to clarify, V1 is just bypassing the regulator portion of the M17, and the version 2 includes removing the brass orifice that is inside. I don't know if I have one out here. Not one that's all not mangled, but that's the inside of your M17. There's a brass orifice inside the air chamber that screws on here. Normally, number one cause for Autofire is somebody who's removed that orifice and is sending 1100 PSI through their marker. If you are getting Autofire, put the orifice back in until you can get your hands on a bolt spring, or you want to attempt something like I've done right here and just shim your bolt spring and see if that works for you. The other thing is, if you have the option, you can run lower output tank, an 800 tank, and possibly Alleviate Autofire. But I have gotten Autofire on a completely intact M17. So it is entirely possible across the line that you will have an issue, and that issue is your bolt spring. So hope there's some takeaway from that, guys, and hope you learned something today. Stay tuned if you like this video. I got just a fun one I'm gonna do right after this, and I'll send it out later. Probably something you've never seen before, and I'm curious myself. See ya.